I stared at the letter in my hands for the third time, convinced there had to be some mistake. The elegant letterhead read, Pemberton and Associates Estate Law, and the formal language inside invited me to attend the will reading of one Eleanor Hartwell. The name meant absolutely nothing. Growing up in the foster care system, I'd learned not to expect much from life. At 28, I was working as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm in Denver, living in a cramped studio apartment and struggling to make ends meet. The idea that someone I'd never heard of would include me in their will seemed impossible. I called the law office, certain they'd mixed up their records. The receptionist was polite but firm. They had the right Sarah Collins, born March 15, 1995, in Colorado Springs. When I explained I'd never heard of Eleanor Hartwell, there was a pause before she said the lawyer would explain everything at the reading. The drive to Millbrook took 2 hours through winding country roads I'd never traveled before. The small farming town looked like something from a postcard, with its main street lined with century-old buildings and American flags hanging from every porch. I'd lived in Colorado my entire life, but had never ventured into this rural corner of the state. Pemberton and Associates occupied a restored Victorian house on Main Street. Inside, the waiting room felt more like someone's living room than a law office, with antique furniture and family photos covering every surface. I sat nervously, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. At exactly 2 o'clock, a distinguished man in his 60s emerged from an inner office. Miss Collins? I'm Robert Pemberton. Thank you for coming. I know this must be confusing, but I promise everything will become clear shortly. He led me into a conference room where 5 other people were already seated around a polished mahogany table, their faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Chapter 2. Hostile Reception. The tension in the room was immediate and palpable. The 5 people seated around the table were clearly family. They shared similar features and that unmistakable air of people who'd grown up with money and privilege. Their clothes were expensive but understated, the kind of casual elegance that comes from never having to out the cost of any. Who is this? Demanded a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled gray hair. Robert, we specifically asked that this reading be limited to family members only. Mr. Pemberton cleared his throat diplomatically. Margaret, please allow me to handle the introductions. Everyone, this is Sarah Collins. Sarah, you're looking at Eleanor's children and grandchildren, Margaret and James Hartwell, and their children David, Jennifer, and Michael. I felt completely out of place in my department store dress and scuffed shoes. These people belonged in this elegant setting. I felt like an intruder who'd wandered into the wrong movie. I'm sorry, I said quietly, but I think there's been a mistake. I've never heard of Eleanor Hartwell, and I'm certainly not related to your family. James Hartwell, a stern man with silver hair and an expensive suit, leaned forward. Then what exactly are you doing here? This is a private family matter. I received a letter asking me to attend, I replied, pulling the invitation from my purse. I called to explain there must be an error, but they insisted I come. Margaret's eyes narrowed as she examined the letter. Robert, this is highly irregular. We don't know this woman, and she clearly doesn't belong here. I insist you remove her immediately. The younger family members, David, Jennifer, and Michael, watched the exchange with barely concealed irritation. They obviously wanted to get through the will reading and divide up their inheritance without any complications from mysterious stranger. Mr. Pemberton raised his hand for silence. I understand your confusion, but I assure you that Sarah's presence here is entirely legitimate. Eleanor specifically requested that she attend this reading. In fact, her presence is essential to fulfilling your mother's final wishes. Chapter 3. Eleanor's Story. Mr. Pemberton opened a thick folder and withdrew several documents. His expression was grave as he looked around the table, his eyes lingering on me with what seemed like sympathy. Before we begin with the formal reading of the will, he said, Eleanor left specific instructions that I share some family history that many of you may not be aware of. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her chair. What kind of family history? Mother never kept secrets from us. I'm afraid that's not entirely accurate, Mr. Pemberton replied gently. Eleanor came to see me 6 months ago, quite distressed about something she'd kept hidden for nearly 30 years. She felt it was time to set the record straight. He pulled out a photograph, a faded color picture of a young woman holding a baby. The woman looked remarkably, with the same dark hair and green eyes. My heart began to race as I stared at the... This is Eleanor's daughter, Rebecca, Mr. Pemberton. She was born in 1966, when Eleanor was just 17 years old. At that time, Eleanor's parents forced her to give the baby up for adoption. It was a different era, and unwed mothers faced tremendous social pressure. The room fell silent. Margaret's face had gone pale, and James was staring at the photograph with obvious shock. That's impossible, Margaret whispered. Mother would have told us if we had a sister. Eleanor deeply regretted the decision for the rest of her life, Mr. Pemberton continued. She tried to find Rebecca many times over the years, but the adoption records were sealed. It wasn't until recently that she was able to trace what happened to her daughter. He looked directly at me, and I felt my world beginning to shift beneath my feet. Rebecca Collins died in a car accident in 1996, shortly after giving birth to a daughter she named Sarah. That daughter was placed in foster care when no other family could be located. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the table, struggling to process what I was hearing. Chapter 4. The Revelation. The silence in the room stretched on as everyone absorbed Mr. Pemberton's word. I felt like I was watching the scene from outside my body, unable to fully comprehend what was being revealed. "You're saying this woman is our half-sister's daughter?" David finally asked, his voice tight with disbelief. "That's exactly what I'm saying," Mr. Pemberton confirmed. "Eleanor spent the last months of her life trying to find Sarah. When she finally located her, she was devastated to learn that her daughter had died, and that her granddaughter had grown up in the foster system." Margaret stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is preposterous. Even if this story is true, which I doubt, this girl has no legal claim to our family's estate. Mother barely knew she existed." "Actually," Mr. Pemberton said calmly, "Eleanor knew quite a lot about Sarah. She hired a private investigator and had been watching her from a distance for several months. She was very proud of what Sarah had accomplished, despite her difficult circumstances." I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "She knew about me? Why didn't she contact?" Mr. Pemberton's expression softened. "She wanted to, Sarah. She was planning to approach you after she got her affairs in order. Unfortunately, her heart attack came sooner than anyone expected." James slammed his hand on the table. "This is all very touching, but where's the proof? Anyone could claim to be related to our family, especially when there's money involved." "Which brings us to the next part of Eleanor's instructions," Mr. Pemberton said, reaching into his folder again. "She anticipated that there would be questions about Sarah's identity, so she arranged for DNA testing." He pulled out a sealed envelope and a small kit. "Eleanor provided a DNA sample before her death, and she requested that Sarah be tested to confirm their relationship. The results of that test will determine how we proceed with the will read." I stared at the testing kit. My mind everything I thought I knew about my life was being turned upside down. I'd always wondered about my biological family, but I'd never imagined anything like this. "I don't understand," I said. "If she wasn't sure I was her granddaughter, why am I here?" "Because," Mr. Pemberton replied, "Eleanor was certain enough to include you in her will." Chapter 5. The DNA test. The DNA test itself was simple, just a cheek swab that took less than a minute. But the implications felt enormous as I handed the sealed sample back to Mr. Pemberton. The Hartwell family watched every movement with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright hostility. "How long will the results take?" Jennifer asked, speaking for the first time since I'd arrived. "The lab promised results within 72 hours, Mr. Pemberton replied. "Eleanor arranged for expedited processing. Until then, I'm afraid we'll need to postpone the formal reading of the will." Margaret's face was flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. We're supposed to put our lives on hold because of some stranger's wild claims?" "These aren't wild claims," Mr. Pemberton said firmly. "These are Eleanor's final wishes, and I'm legally bound to carry them out exactly as she specified." As we prepared to leave, Michael, the youngest of Eleanor's grandchildren, approached me hesitantly. He looked to be about my age, with kind eyes that reminded me of the woman in the photograph. "I'm sorry about how my family is treating you," he said quietly. "This is a shock for all of us, but that's no excuse for being rude." "I understand," I replied. "I'm just as confused as everyone else." "Can I ask you something?" he continued. "What was it like, growing up in foster care? I mean, if you don't mind talking about it." I considered his question carefully. "It was hard. I moved around a lot, never really feeling like I belonged anywhere. I always wondered about my real family. I never imagined anything like this." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "Grandmother Eleanor was an amazing woman. She would have loved to know you." His words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. The idea that I'd had a grandmother who cared about me, even from a distance, was almost too much to process. Over the next 3 days, I could barely concentrate on it. I called in sick to work and spent hours researching the Hartwell family online. They owned one of the largest cattle ranches in Colorado, with land that had been in the family for over a century. Chapter 6. The Results. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was staring at my coffee, too nervous to drink it. Mr. Pemberton's voice was carefully neutral when he asked me to return to his office that afternoon for the continuation of the will read. "Do you have the results?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "I think it's best if we discuss everything together." The drive back to Millbrook felt longer than before. I'd spent the past 3 days alternating between hope and terror, unsure which outcome would be worse. Being rejected by a family I'd never known existed, or being accepted into a world where I clearly didn't belong. The same 5 family members were waiting in the conference room, their faces grim. Margaret barely looked at me as I took my seat, while James drummed his fingers impatiently on the table. Mr. Pemberton entered carrying a manila envelope and wearing an expression I couldn't read. He sat down and looked around the table before speaking. "I have the DNA test results," he announced. "The laboratory confirmed with 99.97% certainty that Sarah Collins is the biological granddaughter of Eleanor Hartwell." The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Margaret gasped audibly, while James's face turned red with what looked like rage. "That's impossible," Margaret said, her voice shaking. "There has to be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Mr. Pemberton replied, sliding the official report across the table. "Sarah is Eleanor's granddaughter, which makes her your niece and the cousin of David, Jennifer, and Michael." I felt dizzy as the reality sank in. After 28 years of having no family, I suddenly had relatives sitting around this table. The fact that they clearly didn't want me there made the revelation bittersweet. "So what does this mean for the will?" David asked, his voice tight with concern. Mr. Pemberton opened his folder and withdrew a thick document. "Now we can proceed with the formal reading. And I think you're all going to be very surprised by what Eleanor decided." Chapter 7. The Will Reading. Mr. Pemberton adjusted his reading glasses and began with the formal legal language that opened Eleanor's will. The standard phrases about being of sound mind and body seemed to stretch on forever while the tension in the room grew thicker. "To my children, Margaret and James," he read, "I leave the sum of $500,000 each, along with my gratitude for the love and support you've shown me throughout my life." Both siblings looked though I could see them calculating whether this was more or less than they'd expected. "To my grandchildren, David, Jennifer, and Michael, I leave $250,000 each, with the hope that this inheritance will help you pursue your dreams and build meaningful lives." The three younger family members exchanged glances. These were substantial amounts, but I could sense their anxiety about what might be next. Mr. Pemberton paused and looked directly before continuing. "To my newly discovered granddaughter, Sarah Collins, I leave the remainder of my estate, including the family ranch, all livestock, equipment, and the 3,000 acres of land that have been in the Hartwell family for 4 generations. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt like I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I'd just heard. Margaret's face had gone completely white, while James looked like he might have a stroke. "That's impossible," Margaret whispered. "She can't leave the ranch to a stranger." "Eleanor also left a personal letter for Sarah," Mr. Pemberton continued, ignoring Margaret's outburst. He handed me an envelope with my name written in elegant script. With trembling hands, I opened the letter and began to read Eleanor's words aloud. "My dearest Sarah, I know this must come as a tremendous shock, and I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about our family connection while I was alive. I spent too many years regretting the loss of your mother, my daughter. When I learned about you, I felt like I'd been given a second chance to make things right." My voice broke as I continued. "The ranch has been our family's heart for over 100 years. I'm leaving it to you because I believe you have the strength and character to honor its legacy. I've watched you from afar and seen how you've overcome every obstacle life has thrown at you." Chapter 8. Family Fury. The explosion of anger that followed was immediate and intense. Margaret shot to her feet, her face twisted with rage. "This is insane. Mother was obviously not in her right mind when she wrote this will. We'll contest it immediately." James was equally furious. "That ranch is worth millions of dollars. She can't just give it away to some foster kid who showed up out of nowhere." "The will is completely legal and valid," Mr. Pemberton said calmly. "Eleanor was thoroughly evaluated by 2 independent physicians who confirmed her mental competency. She knew exactly what she was doing." David leaned forward, his voice strained. "But she doesn't know anything about running a ranch. She's never even been there." "That's not entirely true," Mr. Pemberton replied. "Eleanor arranged for Sarah to receive comprehensive training and support. She's also established a trust fund to cover operating expenses for the first 5 years." I sat in stunned silence, still trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. I owned a ranch, a 3,000-acre cattle ranch that I'd never seen, in a world I knew nothing about. "This is a disaster," Jennifer said, her voice barely controlled. 4 generations of our family's work, handed over to a complete stranger. "I understand your anger," I finally managed to say. "I never asked for any of this. I didn't even know Eleanor existed until 3 days ago." "Then give it back," Margaret snapped. "Sign the ranch over to the family where it belongs." I looked around the table at these people who were technically my relatives but felt like hostile strangers. Part of me wanted to do exactly what Margaret suggested, walk away from this complicated situation and return to my simple, predictable life. But another part of me, a part I didn't fully understand yet, felt drawn to the idea of the ranch. Eleanor had chosen me for a reason, and maybe I owed it to her memory, to at least try to understand what that was. "I need time to think," I said quietly. This is all happening too fast. There's nothing to think about, James said coldly. You don't belong here, and you never will. Chapter 9. First visit to the ranch. Despite the family's hostility, I knew I had to see the ranch before making any decisions. Mr. Pemberton offered to drive me there the next morning, and I accepted gratefully. I'd barely slept, my mind spinning with questions about Eleanor, the ranch, and what I was supposed to do with this unexpected inheritance. The drive took us deeper into Colorado's ranch country, past rolling hills dotted with cattle and horses. The landscape was beautiful in a way I'd never experienced, vast and open, with mountains rising in the distance like ancient guardians. Eleanor loved this land more than anything, Mr. Pemberton said, as we turned onto a gravel road marked with a weathered sign, Hartwell Ranch, Eastern 1924. She used to say it was in her blood, passed down through generations of people who understood what it meant to work the earth. The ranch house came into view as we crested a small hill, and I gasped at the sight. It was a sprawling log structure with a wraparound porch, surrounded by mature oak trees and flower gardens that even in late fall showed signs of careful red barns and outbuildings dotted the landscape, and everywhere I looked, cattle grazed peacefully in fenced pastures. It's beautiful, I whispered, and I meant it. There was something about the place that felt like home in a way I'd never experienced before. We parked near the main house, and Mr. Pemberton handed me a set of keys. Eleanor wanted you to explore on your own first. Take all the time you need. I walked up the porch steps with trembling hands, the old wood creaking under. The front door opened into a spacious living room with exposed beams, a stone fireplace, and furniture that looked both comfortable and expensive. Family photographs covered every surface. Generations of Hartwell had called this place home. In the kitchen, I found a note propped against a coffee maker. It was from Eleanor, written in the same elegant script as the letter from the will reading, "Welcome home, Sarah. I hope you can feel the love that has filled this house for nearly a century. Take your time getting to know the land and the animal. They'll teach you everything you need to know." Chapter 10. Meeting the foreman. As I explored the house, I heard the sound of boots on the porch steps. Through the window, I saw a weathered man in his 60s approaching the front door. He knocked politely and waited, his hat in his hands. "You must be Sarah," he said when I opened the door. "I'm Tom Rodriguez, the ranch foreman. Been working here for 32 years. His handshake was firm and calloused, and his eyes held a warmth that reminded me of Eleanor's photograph. Unlike her biological family, Tom seemed genuinely glad to meet me. "Mrs. Hartwell told me all about you," he continued. "She was so excited when she found out you existed. Spent hours planning how to make this transition work." "I don't know anything about ranching," I admitted. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this." Tom smiled. "That's what Mrs. Hartwell figured. She set up a whole training program for if you're willing. We've got good people here who can teach you everything from cattle management to land conservation." He led me on a tour of the property, explaining the ranch's operations with obvious pride. There were 800 head of cattle, 50 horses, and enough hay production to feed the animals through the winter. The ranch employed 12 full-time workers, most of whom had been there for years. "Mrs. Hartwell was a good boss," Tom explained as we watched cattle grazing in a distant pasture. "Fair but firm, and she really cared about the land and the animals. She always said this ranch was bigger than any one person. It was about being a good steward for future generations." "What do the other workers think about me inheriting the ranch?" I asked. Tom considered his answer carefully. "They're curious, mostly, a little worried about change, but that's natural. Mrs. Hartwell earned their respect over decades. You'll have to earn yours too, but I think you can do it if you're willing to put in the work." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I stood on the porch, looking out over the land that was now somehow mine. It felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's dream. "Mrs. Hartwell used to stand right there every evening," Tom said, joining me on the porch. "She said it reminded her why she worked so hard to keep this place going." Chapter 11. Learning the legacy. Over the next few weeks, I divided my time between my apartment in Denver and the ranch, slowly learning about the world Eleanor had left me. Tom was an excellent teacher, patient with my endless questions, and generous with his knowledge. I learned that the Hartwell Ranch wasn't just a business, it was a cornerstone of the local community. Eleanor had employed local people, supported the school district, and donated generously to community causes. The ranch's success rippled through the entire area, affecting dozens of families. "Your grandmother was more than just a rancher," explained Dr. Sarah Martinez, the local veterinarian who had worked with Eleanor for 15 years. "She was a leader in sustainable agriculture, always looking for ways to improve the land while maintaining profitability. I also discovered that Eleanor had been quietly preparing for my arrival for months. She'd arranged for me to audit agricultural courses at the local community college, set up mentoring relationships with successful female ranchers, and even enrolled me in a ranch management program. She thought of everything. I told Tom one afternoon as we reviewed the training schedule she'd created. It's like she knew exactly what I'd need to succeed. She was a planner, Tom agreed. But more than that, she believed in you. She used to say you had Hartwell blood, and that meant you had what it takes to make this work. The more I learned about Eleanor, the more I regretted never having the chance to. She'd overcome tremendous obstacles to build the ranch into what it was today, facing down droughts, economic downturns, and the challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated industry. Meanwhile, the legal battle with the Hartwell family was heating up. Margaret and James had hired expensive lawyers to contest the will, claiming Eleanor had been unduly influenced or mentally incompetent. Mr. Pemberton assured me that their case was weak, but the stress of the ongoing conflict was taking its toll. They're not going to give up easily, he warned during one of our meetings. The ranch represents their family legacy, and they see you as an outsider who's stolen what should be theirs. Maybe they're right, I said. Maybe I don't belong here. Eleanor didn't think so, Mr. Pemberton replied firmly, and from what I've seen of your progress over the past month, I think she was right to believe. Chapter 12, Finding My Place. 3 months after the will reading, I made the decision that would change my life forever. I gave notice at my accounting, packed up my Denver apartment, and moved to the ranch full-time. The Hartwell family's legal challenge was still pending, but I decided to fight for what Eleanor had given me. The transition wasn't easy. Ranch work was physically demanding in ways I'd never experienced, and there were days when I questioned whether I was crazy to think I could succeed. But slowly, I began to find my rhythm. Tom and the other workers were incredibly supportive, teaching me everything from how to read cattle behavior to the complexities of hay production. I threw myself into learning, studying agricultural journals late into the night, and attending every workshop and conference I could find. You're starting to move like a rancher, Tom observed one morning as we checked on a group of pregnant cows. Mrs. Hartwell will be proud. The community's acceptance came more gradually. Some people were skeptical of the city girl who'd inherited one of the area's most successful ranches, but others were willing to give me a chance. I joined the local cattlemen's association, volunteered at community events, and slowly began to build the relationships that Eleanor had cultivated over decades. The legal battle finally ended in my favor 6 months after the will reading. The judge ruled that Eleanor had been completely competent when she wrote her will, and that her decision to leave the ranch to me was valid and binding. Margaret and James were devastated by the ruling, but Michael surprised everyone by reaching out to me afterward. I want to apologize for how my family treated you, he said during an awkward phone call. Grandmother Eleanor was right about you've proven that you deserve to. Thank you, I replied, genuinely touched by his words. I hope someday we can have a real relationship as cousins. I'd like that too, he said. Maybe we can start over. As my first year on the ranch drew to a close, I stood on the porch where Eleanor used to watch the sunset, feeling a deep sense of belonging I'd never experienced before. Chapter 13, Home at Last. 2 years have passed since that shocking will read, and I can honestly say I've never been happier. The ranch is thriving under my management, with help from Tom and the incredible team Eleanor assembled. We've expanded our sustainable agriculture practices, added a successful agritourism program, and increased our cattle operation by 20%. More importantly, I've found the family and community I'd been searching for my entire life. The ranch workers have become like family, and I've built strong friendships throughout the area. Even some members of the Hartwell family have come around. Michael visits regularly, and Jennifer recently brought her children to see the ranch where their great-grandmother lived. I've learned so much about Eleanor through the people who knew her. She was a woman ahead of her time, breaking barriers in agriculture while maintaining the traditional values that made the ranch successful. I try to honor her legacy every day, making decisions based on what's best for the land, the animals, and the community. The house is filled with new memories now, but I've kept all of Eleanor's photographs and mementos. Sometimes I talk to her picture, telling her about my day, or asking for guidance when facing difficult decisions. I like to think she can see how much I've grown, and how deeply I've come to love this place she left me. Last month, I found a letter Eleanor had hidden in her desk, meant to be discovered after I'd been here for a while. In it, she wrote, "Sarah, I hope by now you understand why I chose you. It wasn't just because you're my granddaughter. It was because you have the heart of a true rancher. You understand that this land is a trust, not just a possession." She was right. This ranch has taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who support you, the community you serve, and the legacy you choose to build. I may have started as an outsider, but I've become exactly what Eleanor hoped I would be, a guardian of the Hartwell legacy and a true daughter of this beautiful land. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It's been an incredible journey from that shocking will reading to finding my true home and family. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please let me know what part of the world you're listening from. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more amazing true stories like this one. Until next time. Remember that sometimes the most unexpected turns in life lead us exactly where we're meant to be.